Welcome to California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. I thank you for joining us. We are joined by Bob Blumenfield. We thank him for being here in the midst of allergy season.
Yes.
So we appreciate it very much. I want to speak with you about something that really touches you and your family. You had mentioned to me your father served in Vietnam, helped patients or servicemen with PTSD. I mean, we honor him and all those men. And you want to continue honoring the men and women of the United States military.
Well, he didn't serve over in Vietnam. He served during the Vietnam War, and when I was a kid, we lived in San Antonio, Texas for a while on a military base, and he would treat folks who came over with PTSD.
And I can only imagine in those early days, he must have been a pioneer, if I may say. I mean, I haven't met him.
Oh yeah, no, he's been very involved. In fact, he now still treats folks coming over from current wars for free.
Nice.
As part of a program to treat returning veterans with PTSD.
So let's talk about those veterans, because whether they have PTSD or not, there are tremendous challenges reintegrating into civilian society, especially given how the wars have been playing out in the Middle East. You want to help those individuals get back to college or into college, for that matter.
Yeah, I have a number of bills that I've done in the past and currently to try to focus on our returning veterans. We have so many returning. 30,000 folks are expected to return from overseas this year in California alone.
And I would think those numbers will rise as we are pulling out of Afghanistan. So it's only going to rise. And 30,000, that's a huge number when you think about it.
It's a huge number, and then you think about the number of veterans that are already here. I mean, it's an incredible number of people, and they're having a tough time reintegrating. And so I've got a couple of bills out there. One is to help them get priority registration for higher education.
This is Combat to College.
This is Combat to College,
So,
2133, AB 2133.
Under that bill, is it preferential admission or is it preferential registration once they're admitted?
It's registration.
And so talk to me why that is so important to get preferential registration. I mean, I know the answer, but hit me.
Well, for a number of reasons. One, they're getting federal GI benefits for a short period of time, and we want to make sure that they can use those GI benefits during that time frame. So there's this window, and we want to say for 15 years, at some point during that 15 years, when they're ready to go back to school, and it's important that they have that flexibility, because a lot of them come back and they've got post-traumatic stress syndrome or some other problem where they're not able to go right away.
Exactly.
But when they do go, we want them to be able to get in and get through classes as quickly as possible and get that registration so they can get back into the workforce.
And what's interesting is, you know as well as anyone, that because of the budget crisis, there are fewer sections being offered. And it's one thing if you enter college at 18 and you may have to go 5 years, that may not be preferable, but if you had served in the military, the earliest that you were entering college is 22, if you did a 4-year duty, and so they're already delayed. And so allowing them to graduate in 4 years, 2 years, whatever it may be, that is an additional advantage for those that already have served our nation so honorably.
Exactly. And so it's really important to get them the benefits that, let them take advantage of the GI benefits, get them registered, get them into the classes, and get them back into the workforce as soon as possible.
So how is this bill faring? I know Paul Cook, a Republican, is the chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. Not many Republicans chair committees, but he's chairing that committee. Is he allowing it to march through?
Oh, he's co-authoring the bill.
Oh, so that helps.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's gotten a very good
hearing,
very good reception. I mean, we had a few bumps at the beginning. We had to work out some issues with the school system and various folks. And it's not that it was without opposition or without controversy, but we've been able to work through, I think, all of the major problems. We've gotten it through committee. It's really, I think it's on its way to the governor's office. So
it's passed.
It's got one more hurdle to go.
Okay.
It's got to get through the Senate.
Okay.
But it's gotten through committee. So we got to get it through the Senate and onto the governor and get him to sign it.
I want to talk more about education. We both have younger children. And we know that our educational system is under tremendous stress. If you look at our public schools, LAUSD, for example, where you send your children, I believe, they have cut 18 days in the school year over the last, I think, since 2008. There's a proposition on the ballot that if it does not pass, what we hear is the school year would be cut at districts like LAUSD by 3 weeks, 15 more days. Talk to me about your concerns, not only as a legislator, but as a father.
Well, I'm extremely concerned. I mean, and it doesn't mean that it will automatically cause a 3-week. They're authorized to find solutions and potentially cut the school year by 3 weeks, which as any parent knows, it would be devastating, not just because we've got to figure out where our kids go during those weeks, but because of the loss of education that would go on and the learning in these critical years that kids have, where every day and every moment in class counts. This is all about, this is all about what the people of California are going to vote on in November. The question in November is not whether or not we have a balanced budget. The question in November is what kind of California do we want to see in the future? Do we want to see a California where we're trying to educate our kids and have the basics? We're not talking about gold-plated education. We're still 47th in the nation in per pupil spending. We're 50th in teacher-to-student ratio.
But when we're not talking about gold-plated education, we are the Golden State. Why don't we have a gold-plated education? I look at New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, the tri-state area. I mean, they have fiscal crises just like we do, and yet their educations, their public schools are outstanding.
Yeah. It's a complicated question, and a lot of it goes back to...
You're from New York, aren't you?
I grew up
Right.
when I was a kid. We lived in New York before
Okay.
coming out here. A lot of it has to do with the way we fund education. I mean, as a portion of our budget, when you look at the general fund budget, we spend 60+% on education. At least by proposition, 43% on
Right.
K-12 education. So we're actually spending, as a portion of our general fund, quite a bit compared to other states. But a lot of other states fund their education through property tax, and
We have Prop 13.
that all shifted with Prop 13 in 1978. We started moving more toward the state funding education. So that's a major problem. But the immediate question is in November, and that is for folks to look at the ballot and say, we want a school system that works. We want to fund our school system, and that means voting yes for Proposition
As they're
30.
looking at the ballot, the following things are in their mind. The state uncovered $250 million of money they didn't know existed. The Parks Department, the Recycling Department.
Let me back up. The state did not find $250 million that didn't exist. There was an issue with the Park Service right now, and I have a hearing on this to really get to the bottom of it, where the Park Service was squirreling away money. And it was really, the amount squirreled away was about $30 million, not billion dollars. 20 million of it was an accounting thing. They had an auditor come out recently, and they talked about how there's a discrepancy in the auditing, but it's not that money is hiding somewhere, it's that there is a difference in accounting. So
Well, on some issues,
obligations
there's no doubt.
versus expenditures.
Cash versus accrual.
Cash versus accrual.
But here's the issue on
but
the Park
but it's not,
Service.
and we're going to get to the bottom of what is and isn't there. But I want to be real clear. We don't mislead people into thinking that there's $250 million sitting out there. I wish there were, but there's not.
But it's money that the Department of Finance didn't know existed. It's money that was not included in the budget calculation.
You're talking about the $20 million of Park Service, or the 54 total of Park Service. You're not talking. The $1 billion figure has to do with the accrual versus cash.
But here's the frustration,
And believe me,
clearly-
I'm
yeah.
extremely frustrated. I mean, as chair of the budget committee, the first thing when I
Right.
heard this is I said, I'm going to hold an oversight hearing. We're doing it this week. We're going to call everyone to task and find out what the heck is going on, and why were folks not telling, why was the administration not telling itself about a particular pot of money?
But here's the challenge. It was a total of $54 million at the Park Service, and the governor had cut 20+ million in the June budget, which meant that 70 parks were going to close, and they started raising money
Right.
to keep them open, and yet they had 20 million plus 2 times over. I mean, that's a tough message.
It's a tough message. I mean, it doesn't, when you got to look at the overall numbers, they still have a $3 billion maintenance problem. I mean, we still have a huge, when you're looking at a next year $96 billion general fund budget, when you're talking about $20, $30 million, it's a lot of money to you and me, but
I
in
understand.
comparison to the budget, it's a very small amount of money.
Okay, his name is Bob Blumenfield. He is a member of the California State Assembly. He has also announced his candidacy for the Los Angeles City Council. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you for watching California Edition. It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thank you for joining us today. Our guest is Steve Knight. He's a member of the California State Assembly. He is running for the California State Senate. That election will be held in November, as well as Proposition 30 being on the ballot. And Proposition 30, as you know, is the governor's initiative. It would increase sales tax by 1/4 cent for 4 years and increase tax on the wealthy, those making $250,000 or more, sliding scale for 7 years. What do you make of Prop 30, sir?
Well, I think that the governor came out when he was running to be governor his second time around. He said, look, I don't want to raise taxes unless we get a vote of the people. Now,
Do you honor that?
Well, I think partially. You know, he did come to the legislature, and we have a huge deficit. We're still in a recession. The state is still trying to rebound. And there weren't the votes in the Assembly, or the Assembly Republicans, to raise taxes. So put this ballot on, hoping that the people will see that if you raise these taxes, then everything's going to be okay. Now,
well, I don't know if I don't think it's, a silver bullet per se. I don't know that he thinks it's a silver bullet. But let's do talk about what they are saying, because there's no doubt, sir, that they are running a campaign that is trying to, I guess one could argue, frighten people. And I don't mean that pejoratively, but they are painting a picture that is, to some would be scary. For example, what they have said is that if the initiative does not pass, the school year, for example, would be cut by 15 days. At LAUSD, for example, it's already been cut by 18 days since 2008. Is that accurate?
Well, if you want to raise taxes, what you do is say if you don't do this, it's going to affect schools. If we came out and said, if you don't do this, we're going to have to cut some program like the welfare to work or something like that, it's harder to get people to vote for that. If you say empty classrooms, people are more in line with that.
But what's interesting is the way that the majority passed the budget in June is they didn't cut education at all. They cut other programs, and the reason they did that, as I understand it, is with the hope that the Prop 30 passes in November, because if it does, there won't be cuts to education.
What I understand, Brad, 97% of the trigger cuts, which are basically coming, are to education.
That is accurate, because there were no education cuts in June.
That's right. So in essence, if I said, if you don't raise these taxes, then almost everything that we cut from here on out is going to be education. You're going to be more inclined to do that. I mean, the typical voter.
But here's what's frustrating for many voters. I mean, you're a dad, I'm a dad. We see what's happening to education. Look, I don't understand the intricacies of cutting here, cutting there, and I don't think the average voter does either. But what I do know is over the last 4 years, $1 billion has been cut from public education. That's just K-14. And then you look at UC and CSU and community college. I mean, there's a huge cuts in education. We're spending less in higher education today than we did 5 years ago. And so why that's happening, is it the way we tax? But it is a message that resonates.
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, Prop 98, in my opinion, is not the way to fund schools.
Well, that's the initiative that requires 40% be spent on education.
And it's connected to our revenue, and it can go very cyclical, can go very up and down. I have 2 children that have been in public school all their lives. They're going to go to public college.
University.
I want them to have a great education, and they have. What we have done in the past is said, you know what? If we're going to cut the money out of the big boy. The big boy is education. It takes a huge amount of our money.
But do they have an option of where to cut?
We do have an option. In fact, last year there was a group that came out of the minority party and built a budget that didn't cut $1 at a K through 16. That means the UCs were not cut.
So what was
no money was cut. Well, a lot of the services were cut, and a lot of the different pay schedules were cut. Nothing out of education, but a lot out of other services.
Here's the challenge. I think it's fair to say the second driver in the budget, prisons. I mean, we spend more on prisons today than we do in education. And we don't have a lot of choice on how much we spend on prisons because, as you know, our prisons are under federal receivership for health care. We're spending, I think, $8 billion to build new prison hospitals, singular, plural, I'm not sure. We have a mandate to release prisoners early. Maybe that will help our budget situation, but the prison system is a huge driver.
Well, in essence, I don't think it's going to help our budget at all. I think that you're going to be releasing criminals back out onto the street. It's going to cause more damage into our communities, and we're going to be rearresting these offenders. But yeah, we have to look at how we get past this receivership, how we move past this. I mean, when I was on LAPD, we were under the Christopher Commission.
Of course.
We had to move past this and then get a hold on why we spend $49,000 per inmate per year when other states, maybe a fairly comparable state is Texas, and they do it for about 55%.
I mean, is it though? Because they don't tax the same way we do. Some could argue
Well,
their taxing structure is smarter.
I just use population, and I use the population of the prison.
Fair enough. Here's another challenge that we face, and that deals with social services. We have a third of the country's welfare recipients, but an eighth of the population.
Correct.
So where's the disconnect here? I mean, we don't want to injure the children of welfare recipients. I mean, as it is, we're going to be moving many children and recipients off healthy families. Again, it's an overwhelming problem that seems to have.
Well, and the issue is always this. If I give you something, and it's great, and I take something back, you're going to be very upset with me, instead of incrementally helping you out. And the reason I say that is because we do have 32% of the welfare in this country. The reason is because we have the best. We have the best program. Now,
is that bad?
Well, it's bad in some regards. If you can't afford it, it's bad. You want to help people, and as a government, we want to be able to provide services. But at some point, you've grown past what you can afford. And if anybody doesn't believe we're going to be in another recession at some period, they're delusional. The economy goes like that. It's very, very up and down.
So if not Prop 30, then what? I mean, you've been here. We have been cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And is there more to cut? Probably. But, efficiencies, I don't know where you find $16 billion of efficiencies. What's the answer if it's not
Well, let's
Prop
understand
30?
that part of that $16 billion is going to be out of the money that he's hopefully getting for the taxes. So the deficit is not that much. But yes, there are ways that we can change government. I don't believe there is a voter out there that doesn't believe that government can be more efficient, that government has expanded past its role, that government is providing too much. The problem is once you've provided something, when you take it away, everyone thinks that how would we live? How are we going to go forward without this program? Well, we did for many years. So now in this recessionary period, it is our time to stand up and say, priorities are very important. Public education, keeping bad guys behind bars, getting some of these infrastructure projects moving. I mean, those are big priorities that move our state forward. I believe that our state is going to be moving forward as our country is going to be moving forward over the next couple of years. We can't wait for that.
Can we really grow our way out of this?
We cannot wait for that. We have to balance right now in what we have. And remember, this is a budget that we passed in June, hoping we're going to get something in November. Why wouldn't we just pass a budget in June with what we have? And if taxes pass in November, then we'll work on that.
Well, I mean, on the education side, there would have been huge cuts, and we would have seen cuts to the school year immediately.
No, we couldn't. We could have done that without cutting education. And that's why I bring that up, because we did. We built a budget in June that didn't cut education. Now, some services would have taken a huge hit. There's no doubt about it. But we said that education was going to be a priority. We built a budget. Education didn't get cut a dollar.
Okay, his name is Steve Knight. He's a member of the California State Assembly. He is also a candidate for the California Senate. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thanks for watching California Edition. California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you for joining us today. Our guest, Anthony Cannella, he is a member of the California State Senate. And sir, I recently learned about a new theft. It was mind-boggling to me. What individuals are doing is they are stealing metal. Near my house, there was, I'll call it a bronze statue. Bronze isn't the right metal, but whatever it is, they literally tied it up and pulled it off its base. What's going on?
Yeah, so it's metal theft, and it's a very big deal in the state of California, and especially in the Central Valley where I'm from. What happens is it's usually folks that are addicted to drugs. It's an easy way for them to make some money. They'll go and they'll steal metal, whether it's copper wire or pumps or brass sprinklers from agricultural fields, and they'll go and sell it and they'll get money, and then that will fuel their habit. And so it's horrible.
And I understand copper is very valuable.
Yeah,
you can make
well, what happens is when the commodity prices are up, then there's an incentive to do that, and it's widespread. In fact, in Fresno County, it's estimated that about 85% of the rural crimes are metal theft. And so what will happen is someone will go and steal some wiring from a pump, for example, and they'll get $30 or $40 for that wire. Yet it will cost the farmer, could cost him $5,000 to fix it. So it's a big problem in the state of California.
So what is the answer? What can the legislature do, if anything?
Well, I would argue that the legislature has actually made it worse. And
really?
In some ways they've made it worse because through realignment that was passed last year, if you recall, that takes the three nons, takes them out of state prison.
Non-sexual, non-violent, non-serious.
Right. Takes them out of state prison, put them in county jail. Well, it also happens because there's only limited county jail space. It displaces the folks that would traditionally be in county jail, which would typically be these folks that have operate in the metal theft rings. And so now they're released and they're able to go out and do their job.
But the challenge is, as you know, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the state of California had to decrease its prison population. And so the governor passed this plan, with support of the Democratic Party in the legislature, to transfer the three nons to county jails, but now the county jails have an overcrowding problem.
Yeah, we could have been building prisons, in fairness, to house these folks. So there were other things that we could have been doing over the years instead of releasing prisoners.
The challenge is, of course, we could have, but we didn't. So what do we do right now? Again, I just present it because we have this problem right now, and it's causing all these extraneous ramifications.
Right. Well, and then that's a fair question. So what also the legislature did a few years ago is they lowered the threshold for grand theft. It used to be anything over $400 was felony grand theft. They raised that to $900. So now what happens if someone goes out and steals metal and operates under $950, then it's just a misdemeanor and they're released quickly. So we need to undo that.
Right.
Secondly, what happens, and this is a big problem, is paying cash to these people that bring metals in. There should never be a case where the recyclers pay these folks cash because it's not traceable.
Well, that seems like that's fixable. We can talk about the increasing the threshold, but that seems easily fixable.
It is. We can do that, and there is a bill this legislative session to do that. In addition, there's another bill out there that I support that says if somebody brings something in that belongs to a municipality and or is obviously has been stolen, for example, fire hydrants are being stolen, manhole covers, a statue, bleachers from football fields. I mean, the person that's the recycler, and let me be fair, the recyclers for the most part are good actors. They're playing by the rules and obeying, but what happens is you have these rogue recyclers out there that work with these folks that steal it, they take it, and then they will ship it off to China or do other things. So there are steps that we can take to...
Couldn't they be charged with receipt of stolen property?
They can, but a lot of times they're not caught, right? They buy the material from the folks that steal it, and then they ship it, they take it to the ports, and they get it out of here and take it to China.
I want to go back to the issue of increasing the threshold because, look, Californians are so frustrated. We want the bad guys to go away, but the problem is, as I understand it, smarter people have told me that we have been passing stricter sentences, throughout the last decade or two, and that is what's caused our overcrowding problem, which the Supreme Court called unconstitutional, which requires us to release prisoners into the county jails, and then they're releasing them because they're overcrowded. It's a cycle that is incredibly frustrating. Yeah. Where do we go from here? We're really at a crossroads, sir.
Well, I think we are at a crossroads, and yes, we have been passing these propositions, and the legislature has been doing things to put people away longer, and I would argue that has made us safer. So now these folks are being released, and if you talk to any one of your DAs or any one of your sheriffs, they're saying that crimes are way up. Property crimes are through the roof, and the Department of Justice numbers will show that.
Crime is down during this recession.
I disagree. I would argue, and this is based on my discussion with the district attorneys and the sheriffs, that property crimes are way up, and the Department of Justice numbers will reflect
I do
that.
know that we are seeing a spike. I have read that as well. But again, it begs the question. I mean, look, I'm sure you feel the same thing that Californians are feeling, which is put the bad guys away.
That's right.
But we're having to spend $8 billion to build a prison health system because we're under federal receivership, because our prisons are overcrowded.
Well, again, we need to build prisons. I mean, I know that nobody likes to say that, but we need to do that.
And that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's a job creator. But the challenge is we're spending now more on prisons than we are on education.
Yeah.
You know, and
people need to quit committing crimes. So if we want to be safe, let me tell you. So I know it's a great argument that people make that we need to flip that, spend more on schools and prisons. But
it's not even so much an argument. It's a frustration. You know, it's just a downright frustration that we want to put the bad guys away. But what do we do when the UC and CSU system had the steepest spike in tuition in the nation last year?
I agree.
Well,
but we don't release prisoners to do that.
Here's one way maybe, and that's pension reform.
Yeah.
That's one way the state may be able to save money. So let's talk about pension reform, sir. Because as you know, you were one of, was it called the Big Five or Big Six or whatever it is, last year that was working with the governor toward pension reform.
Right.
And we all thought that you had a deal in place. For whatever reason, you probably know better than I don't know if you can say it out loud, that deal fell apart. But what we do know is that the governor then turned around, submitted a 12-point plan that many say is very similar to the plan that you negotiated, and then the Republicans submitted that exact plan into the legislature, the Democratic governor's plan into the legislature.
Right.
Checkmate. I mean, you'd think the Democratic governor submitted it, Republicans said yes.
Right. Well, and you're correct. That is the plan that we negotiated over last year. And it was a good plan, and it was a compromise plan, quite frankly, because there are certain members of my party that would have liked to have gone farther. But that was the plan we agreed on. We couldn't reach a deal, and that's a different segment. We can talk about that. But then afterwards, the governor said that this is the plan. And I think it's a very fair plan. I think it's a great plan. I think ultimately it will solve the pension problem in the state of California. And so it's my hope that the pro tem will bring that forward.
But, you know, educate me. I mean, if President Obama, for example, submits a plan to the Congress, the Democrats are going to get in line and they're going to vote for it.
Right.
Same with President Bush and the Republicans. It doesn't work that way in Sacramento. I mean, the governor, a Democratic governor, submits a plan. Shouldn't the Democrats get in line, support it, and then the Republicans would support it too, and we'd have, you know, this great plan and kumbaya, and we're done.
Well, except that we're an equal branch of government with that as the executive, and so we have our own thoughts as well. And the Democratic Party, look, they're very close to labor, and they usually advocate on their behalf, and so I think that they're trying to work with them to come up with a compromise. I believe that the plan that the governor put forth that we got behind is a very fair plan for everyone.
He's
so
arguably close to labor. You know, I'm rendered speechless. Forgive me. It just seems as if this should be easy.
It is easy for us, obviously, because we produce the legislation. So if you have to ask one of your
and I have, and
Democratic
I will.
senators.
So if you look toward the future, do you think that this year we will have any form of pension reform?
Yeah, we talked about a little bit about this before we started, and I said the taxes are on the ballot. That's going to push pension reform because the people of California are very frustrated, and they're saying, why should we give you more money, Sacramento, when you haven't proved to us that you are responsible with it? And we have the problem with the park system that had $54 million, all these other special funds. But in addition, nothing's been done on pensions. Nothing has been done on pensions, and I think the people of California are saying, look, get your house in order right now. And when you get your house in order, then maybe we'll consider giving you more money. But that's what I think, that's why pension reform, something will be done this year. Whether it's legitimate, whether it matches the governor's plan, that's a different question.
His name is Anthony Cannella. He's a member of the California State Senate. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be back on California Edition.